Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for joining me again for another Women's Spotlight. As you know, every month we bring you women that are up to great things to inspire you to get out there and live the life that you truly want. You don't have to pick one thing, you can do many. And a lot of the ladies that we sit down with have massive lives, but it's interesting how they came upon it. And today's no different. Today we're with Dorothy Bossé, and what a beautiful name she has, an equal beautiful spirit. And I can't wait to share that with you. So please join me in welcoming Dorothy. Dorothy, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
It's really a pleasure. And if I can just take a moment to say, as I'm sitting there and I was listening to your name, it just exudes femininity. And you have so much femininity. I just want to take time to acknowledge that. Nowadays, as female leaders, many of us are afraid to walk with that femininity first. So I don't know if anyone's ever told you that, but I'd like to start there.
Well, I really appreciate that, Tara. And I don't know whether I did it full justice when I was in the corporate world, but I certainly have embraced it fully in my new life.
Yeah, and it's wonderful that you've got that joint perspective. You've gone through 18 years at Suncor, working your way through multiple different roles. And now you're a mother of an 8-year-old boy, and you're doing this amazing life work for you where you're helping women really step into their truth and get away from exhaustion and overwork. And to me, when I hear that, that means step into their creativity and their femininity. But why don't you tell us a little bit about what that means for you, just the transition, and then we'll go deeper into your Suncor experience.
Oh my goodness. Well, the transition has been an extraordinary journey that started 2 years ago formally when I made the decision to leave the corporate world and dedicate myself to this full time. But truthfully, had been at least another 4 or 5 years in the making as I struggled with what to do next, and deciding to leave the corporate world and step fully into the role of coach, and an empowerment coach specifically has been the greatest decision that I've ever made, and has been the smoothest, most natural fit for me out of any role that I've ever taken on in my life.
Well, I just want to take a moment and acknowledge you for that brave act to step into something that is your passion and now your calling. It's really wonderful to hear that you've had that brave step forward and that you're of no regrets. Now,
None
is it easy
whatsoever.
though?
None whatsoever.
That's the question though. Was it easy making that
Oh,
transition?
well, no, it wasn't. Like I said, it was many, many years in the making. And I think part of the challenge for me, well, there were several, but one of them was I had a very specific idea of what success is supposed to look like. And climbing the corporate ladder and succeeding along the corporate ladder was my only definition for myself of success. So to step into anything that isn't getting promoted up the ranks of a corporation didn't really, it didn't even compute as an option that you could still be successful and pursue that path. So I struggled for a long time. I didn't have that clarity and that insight. Knowing what I know today, I would have really benefited from a life coach to get together with and do some fun exercises and come up with those answers a lot faster than it took me. So yes, it was a bit of a struggle to make the decision and to find my path. But once I found it, it was not a struggle at all.
Oh, that's beautiful to hear. And for those trying to work their way up the corporate ladder, 18 years in an organization is a long time. Can you talk to us a little bit about your journey through that corporate ladder growth and tell us more?
Absolutely. I started with the corporation right out of university, and I was very lucky to be working for a company that actually promoted young talent in the sense of we had lots of attention, lots of development, lots of opportunities to get stretched, take on large projects. and experience a very versatile approach to business. You would learn one day how to do sales, and the next day sit at the table on the marketing side and move on and experience how the product goes to retail, and then experience what it's like to sell it in wholesale. So I had no shortage of opportunity to really step outside of my comfort zone, and take on greater responsibility, and constantly be learning, constantly be someone who's on the outside and has to learn, gain trust, and um, earn the right to sit at the table, whatever the table was that's a given year, and be rewarded beautifully for that effort over the years. So um, it was a challenging 18 years, but it was also an interesting 18 years, and I've learned a great deal through the process.
Amazing. And you talked about getting a seat at the table. It is sometimes it feels like it's hard for a woman to get a seat at the table, but it's even harder to get a seat at the table being your authentic feminine self, is my perspective. Would you agree with that? And if so, why?
Absolutely. It is very hard to show up authentically, especially in a corporate workplace, especially in a conservative corporate workplace. Um, there are certain unwritten norms, certain written standards, and there's actually, if thinking about it now, there's a certain energy that you need to adjust to. You can't be floating out here super bubbly and exuberant. In fact, that was one of the first pieces of advice when I entered into the corporate world, and I was super bubbly and exuberant. And someone sat me down in one of my earlier roles and said, you have a lot of potential, kid. You're pretty great, but you can't be out there guns a-blazing. You need to bring it down a bit. And truthfully, it's probably part of what made it very challenging over the 18 years, was adjusting my light and adjusting some of that exuberance and femininity, to make sure that I didn't stand out too much.
And I always feel, I use the word contorted or boxed in, where you're being restricted to the norm of what came before you. However, if the norm of what came before you in a leadership capacity is predominantly male, then you're being contorted into that male zone. So how do we show that we're professional, capable, but that we have to do it in our own right, is something that I often write about and think about. And as we're doing that, it doesn't mean we don't lend respect to our male counterparts. In my
Right.
mind, it means we respect them more because we allow them to be men and we come as women. And then we can really, balance out the teens dynamic. So as you went through this, for the women out there who are either, maybe they're trying to climb the corporate ladder. Maybe those are some of the clients you're working with that are feeling exhausted because they're not showing up with their authentic selves. How do you start to, get into the nitty gritties of that to help coach them?
It's really about well, first of all, getting very clear about what their ultimate goals are and what is driving those ultimate goals. And then when we're clear on that, taking a very detailed look around and within themselves. So what is their current reality? How do they feel in that reality? And then how do they feel within themselves? Ultimately, our biggest challenge of showing up with authenticity isn't necessarily the conservative corporate structure. It's our fear within ourselves that if I show up fully authentically, I will not be accepted and I will not break through. And I don't know with 100% certainty that if I had shown up fully authentically, if I wouldn't be just as successful or even more so.
I love that delineation so much that it's not the corporate world that puts the boundaries, it's us that put the boundaries on ourselves. And the core element that pushes us to that is a fear. So if we're allowing fear to drive our life, we can't show up as a creative, whole, fearless leader. And it's only when we push past the fear, we get on the other side of it and we see what's possible. So you've
Exactly.
done that now by changing careers. And it sounds like you started to learn more about that during your 18-year process. So if you had to go back, and maybe this will be very helpful for some of the younger viewers or some of the people who are looking for a career change, if you had to go back and talk to the person, the you that was sitting in the chair that day when you got that advice, how would you alter or tailor the advice that was given to you to make it something that you think would have propelled your career even further and allowed you to do it authentically? How would you tweak the advice?
I don't think I would tweak the advice. I think I would go back and tell younger me it is one man's perspective. And
Mm,
his perspective, while well-intentioned, is based on his observations and his experience, and he isn't you. So take that literally with a grain of salt and do you.
that is such well-rounded advice because what I just heard from you is one person is allowed their opinion. Their perspective on you doesn't change you. And it's quite important for you to still hear it because you can't lead with having broad profile of what who and what's around you. You have to respect that perspective. You just don't have to own it. Is that fair?
Yes, that's absolutely fair.
All right, so for all of you out there, we're not saying ignore the perspective, take it in, learn from it, but you ultimately decide what you're trying to create with it. So not only did you go through this 18-year journey, but you also are first generation immigration to Canada. So, you came here when you were 9 years old. That's an incredible story. Tell us about those first years or whatever you can remember that kind of stood out when you were 9 and you came to Canada.
Oh my goodness. Well, that was very challenging. That was very challenging. Language was a barrier. And I came actually around the same time that my son is now, which is really
Mm,
interesting. Um, Kids were pretty mean. And what I mean by that is the kids made a very simple conclusion that if you don't speak our language, therefore you are less intelligent.
mm,
Unfortunately, when kids signal at you that you're a loser or stupid, that's pretty international. You pick up on that very easily. Um, so I would say that was a very early experience into being the outsider and needing to earn and prove my right to sit at the table. Uh,
mhm,
it built a lot of resilience in me. And I think that I own a lot of my effort and diligence in how I communicate to that period in my life where I felt so very misunderstood and struggled for that connection with my peers. So yeah, that comes to mind.
yeah, and I think when I hear that, I had a similar, I was born here, but my father immigrated here. And you said your husband's from New Brunswick. My mom's from New Brunswick. Oddly enough, there you go. There's another connection point. But I remember feeling very isolated and like the outsider. And there was like songs written about me. And, it was all about, for me, it was all about my weight and my toughness and my whatever the case was. It made me stronger, but for me, it made me stronger to a detriment. And what I mean by that is it became all about getting the seat at the table. It became all about showing up as others would accept me. It became all about how do I be a chameleon and fit in as opposed to how do I show up as I need to show up. And, for those of you out there who feel like you're on the outskirts at any time, those feelings are universal. I think we all feel it in one way, shape, or form once in our life. So, how did you kind of in for me, when I'm talking to you, I think you'd have to go back to that child and be okay with saying, "Hey, we can pave our own path," before you could leave an 18-year corporate, you know, role and move into your own business. You had to go back and say something to her to let her know it was okay. Is that fair?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I had to do a lot of work with her, not just when she arrived to Canada, but even before she left. And it was a lot of going back and connecting to that child and saying, you are going to be okay. Things will work out for you. Don't dim your light. Your light is important. Your light is good. Your light is what attracts others to you. You're safe.
Mm,
Um, and I think that it's reinstilling that sense of safety, because I so resonate with what you said, the chameleon, the adapter, the people pleaser. It's all survival mode, right? It's all about don't let the tribe exclude me. I have to survive. I have to be part of this. But if you understood that you're safe, and
mm,
if you understood that you're safe to be yourself, then you're not so reliant on
mm.
that feeling. So I did have to go back and re-imprint that into that little girl's mind. Yes.
Well, congratulations on doing the work. It's no easy task. I know I've had to do a lot of it, and I feel like I'm doing it every day. But it helps us to understand that anything that happened to us before we were 7 has implanted these things in our mind, and it's driving our subconscious mind to make decisions for us. And so, how do we recircuit that brain as adults? There's a lot of work there. So now you use creativity and your lessons from burnout as a way to help women step into their power and regain energy, time, and purpose. So tell me a little bit more about how you do that.
Yes. Well, first of all, I believe that even though not everyone would identify themselves as an artist, I truly and genuinely believe that every single person out there is creative in some shape or form. We are all made creative beings. But as we grow up and as we take on more responsibility and become more serious, oftentimes we lose connection to that creativity, whatever that might be. For some, it might be actually artistic endeavors. For others, it might be gardening or cooking or, even architecture or designing plans or building a business is creative.
Mhm, mhm,
I truly believe that when we can just take a moment and reconnect to our sense of creativity and get into the flow of doing something that we love, it's a form of meditation. It's a form of being present. And it is a very sneaky and fun way to find those pathways back to your intuition and
mhm,
into that inner voice, that inner knowing. It always sits wherever your creativity sits. It always sits behind that creative spark. So I like to challenge my clients. What did you love? What do you like to do? What art form or creative form of expression did you wish you could do more that you haven't explored in a long time? Let's bring that back and let's get to know you.
mhm,
I like to get them to take a look at themselves, like I said, in words, and maybe describe the voice of wisdom within them, as well as that inner critic. What do they
mhm,
look like? What do they sound like? What are they into? So that they start to distinguish between what lives up here and creates all of that noise and what lives in here and speaks all that or whispers all of that beautiful truth.
mhm.
Um, yeah, I think that accessing creativity is a really fun, beautiful, and gentle way to repave that connection.
And do you find when women start to work with you that it's hard for them to release some of the logic brain and step into the creativity or what I like to call the heart space thinking? Like, do you have Is there a moment where people like, wait, this is not going to be effective in my corporate world? I can't lead like that.
Um, so getting them into the creative space is one thing. Helping them stay in that space through the everyday is certainly a practice. It is certainly about building new habits and about building new thought patterns, and some neuro-linguistic programming for sure. And there's a very, very important element here of learning how to speak to ourselves more kindly.
Mm,
Stop speaking to yourself and stop allowing that voice up here, that inner critic, to tell you about everything that's wrong, and invite this voice to the table
mm,
and have it say a little bit of what's right and what's real. Um,
absolutely.
practice, and then they'll do great. And then after a while, I feel this way again because this we've nurtured it for so long, right? Um, right or wrong, through conditioning, we've just spent more time listening to this one than we have to this one. It takes a while to reprogram those neurons.
It does. And we're not saying that the logic doesn't have purpose or place, or that our fear doesn't keep us safe. It thinks that every little thing is a saber-toothed tiger trying to come and eat us. It serves a purpose. But I believe, as you said, we've been conditioned so long to think that the only purpose for logic in the corporate world is to help you get ahead, and anything other than logic is not going to assist. But what happens when you tap into creativity is, like, I feel you get into flow. And once you get into flow with your people that you're leading, it gives them permission to do the same. And that's where new innovative ideas come from.
Yes, yes. And it allows you to show up more authentically, and that invites them to show up more authentically. And the more authentic everyone can be, the easier it is to build trust.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one thing that we don't often talk about, because you want people that you can trust and you want to be trusted. But the only way to really be able to show up that way truly is by being authentic. And to do that, it takes being a little bit vulnerable too.
Yeah, and I know authenticity seems to be a buzzword lately, but it does come from that integrity and that trust that you can step up and really be yourself. So, with that said, I know that one of the reasons you left your corporate gig, I found it interesting when I was reading your bio, was about integrity and not feeling like you were in full alignment. And for me, that's one of my core guiding values, is to have integrity and for my word to mean something. How would you help a client who's trying to bring integrity to a workplace and they feel like they're not being trusted, or they're not being treated that their word is worth something, or they're having some issue where they don't feel that there's integrity in their workplace? How do you coach someone like that? What tools do you have?
Well, it's an excellent question. I think the first place I would start is to validate whether the feeling is reflective of the story that they're telling me. Sometimes the meanings we make and the bare facts that are out there are two very different things. And with a little bit of perspective, you realize, oh, I imposed meaning on that look, that statement, that situation. Maybe there was another interpretation for it. So I'd test for that. And if there actually is an instance, and there often are instances where there isn't great integrity, that person isn't really being heard, um, I would I would work with them on the controllables.
Mm,
Is there Could you speak up louder? Could you use a language that resonates better with this audience? What else would you like to try? What else are you prepared to try? And get them to really dig into how far they're prepared to work within their current environment and within the current organization, And maybe that path takes us to the conversation of, are you tired? Is this not working? What else would you like to try instead? And sometimes that means parting ways
Mhm.
and respectfully saying another opportunity might be a better fit for me.
Absolutely, and having the power to do that. Two things you said really brought up my thoughts about the coaching industry as a whole. The first thing is the story in your mind and how you're putting that story together. It's not necessarily what is happening, right? You're imposing that viewpoint. So the first thing I want to talk about is, how to manage the stories that we create. The second thing that you said is you said, I would ask you. And so that's another critical thing that I believe is misrepresented in the coaching field. We don't tell people what to do.
No.
View people as resourceful, complete, and whole, and they've got everything in them. We're just helping to give a pathway. So let's first start with the stories in your head. How have you been able to manage that even for yourself and help your clients with that?
I don't know if you're familiar with the book, The Four Agreements. I think that's a
I love it. So
spectacular
simple,
book.
but so great.
Yes. So if my client is open to that, I might have them refer them and say, hey, read this book. Or if they're not open to that, I'll give them the synopsis of saying, take nothing personally. Nothing really in life is necessarily about you. It's about the person who is speaking to you. They've got a different perspective. They're on a completely different map. And it's so easy for us to get caught up in what we're seeing, what we're thinking we're seeing. But that's not necessarily the intent behind it on the other side. The other person could be in a very different place. So I invite my clients to lovingly question these meanings that they make and just explore them. What else might be true? What gives me the evidence that this is true? What else do I know? What am I basing this on? And oftentimes, when we explore it with the right questions, we really come to that conclusion quickly. Oh, it was a meaning I imposed. It
Mhm.
wasn't actually there. So just that loving, non-judgmental curiosity, to look at it from a slightly broader perspective helps dispel the stories that we make in our minds.
And it's not that we want to make bad stories. It's just that we take all of our experiences, all that's happened to us, and then we put that lens and we look at what's coming at us and we see the movie of life through that lens. So we've got to kind of strip it away a bit, right? And then when it comes to finding your clients whole and complete and trying to get them to give you the answers, I know I've struggled with this a few times, but how do you kind of how do you work through that? How do you get the person who you're coaching to say, you're right. Okay, I've got this. Here's what I've come up with.
So there's different exercises depending on what we're working on. But honestly, my number one go-to is always journaling. It's one of the first things that I ask my clients, are you journaling? Do you have a journal? You should get a journal. You should just start journaling. I'm a big fan of that. So if they're struggling with getting clarity, getting answers, I say journal about it. Let's revisit this. Go to your journal. Give me 5 minutes of uninterrupted writing on that subject, and let's just see what comes up. Because I truly believe that journaling, amongst other creative forms, accesses something in our subconscious, and it gives it a caveat to come out and express itself.
Mhm.
And so many times that either myself or a client would be so surprised by what came up. It's almost as if it was somebody else writing it, but the clarity that sits there, oh, well, look at that. It was there all along.
And you use not only journaling, but you also do some art workshops to help get into that. Tell us more
Yeah.
about the workshops.
Um, so there again, very different exercises. I love vision boards. I love having people paint me, literally paint me a picture, collage me a picture, but express it. And I don't like to impose a lot of restrictions on it, or a lot of instruction actually to it. Make me a vision board, use whatever tools you want, use words, use phrases, use anything that to you represents what is important. And then let's talk about that. And half of it comes out of what they create, but the other half, the really interesting half, is comes out of how they present what they created, because that's where the additional words again come out, and the deeper meaning.
And then you can really put things together. And although vision boards have been around forever, I think they are so compelling and they just help you stay on task. So all of this, you also have a program that you've created. So before we go today, I want to give you the opportunity to talk about this wonderful program in case any of the ladies out there want to, take you up on that offer.
Thank you. Yes, I do have a signature program, and consistent with my positioning and my messaging, it is called Become an Intentional Artist of Your Destiny. It is a 90-day program, and through it, I take my clients through really 3 phases. The first one is really sketching the big picture. So, what is it that you want? Where is it that you are today? Who is it that you are today? And who were you as a child? We touched on that a little bit. That brought you to where you are today. And once we have a sketch of the big picture, well, then I help you step into the artist that you are, whatever that means to you as an individual again. So that's learning new tools to cultivate intuition and to build your trust within yourself, and taking back your power if you've given it away, whether you gave it away to your limiting beliefs or your fear or that inner critic, or actually literally gave your power away to other people. It's time to take that power back and start nurturing your values and your priorities through some good, healthy habits. And finally, once you start getting comfortable with all of that, you start to create with intention. So here we create a good, safe space with some accountability. You start taking new chances. You start doing new things, trying new things. You start building some healthy boundaries. And my favorite, you start letting go of what no longer fits.
I love it. So for me, when I just hear that, my whole thing is permission to expand, right? And so I'm always talking about how do we step into the fullest version of ourselves and expand. And so that sounds like a great way to get there, and a nice methodology and process to help unwind some of the conditioning that we've gone through. Well, I want to thank you so much for being with us today. But before we go, I always end with this question. With you today, we talked about it a little bit already. But if you could go back and you could tell that little girl who was about to get on the plane something, anything, but the most compelling thing that you can think of that would make a difference, what would it be?
As funny as this will sound, I would tell her, don't put away your crayons. Don't put away your paintbrush. Keep them close by. You're going to need them, and they will help you.
I love it. That is the best. That's so great. I love it so much. Because I color sometimes, like when I get frustrated, I'm like, I'm going to pull out my crayons right. I've got to, or if my niece comes over, one of the two. Well, thank you so much for being with us. For all of you out there, thank you for joining me for another Women's Spotlight. We do this to have fun and to inspire ourselves, and today is no different. So if there's something you want to step into, if you want to get out of the box of the contorting and step into the fullest version of yourself, you have permission to expand. Just look at all the lovely ladies that we hear from on this show. So thanks for being here. Thank you, Dorothy, for being here. And I wish you all an amazing, amazing day.
Thanks so much for watching. Subscribe and follow me. And also, if you want some other content, hit me up on Tara Mishral Speaks on Instagram, or join my inner circle at taramishral.com. You will be the first to receive new content when it drops, as well as the first to get the Women's Spotlight. Learn about other amazing women in our local community that are up to big things. Thanks again, with love and light. Until next time, guys.